I call Barbara Stewart.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I am very pleased to rise on behalf of New Zealand First to take a call on the Substance Addiction Compulsory Assessment and Treatment Bill. Mr Speaker, New Zealand First is supporting this bill to Select Committee, and we will be most interested to hear the submitters' views on this complex issue. As others have said, this bill is outdated and did need to be reviewed. We can't have a bill which is 50 years old as part of the legislative framework. When we have a look at compulsory treatment, we know that there are provisions for compulsory treatment already that are followed by the courts, but we also know that the process itself is very complicated and very time-consuming. Applications have to go through the district court, hence the provisions are rarely used. Now, I was most interested to read the regulatory impact statement and to read the concerns of the Law Commission. And when I read through those concerns, I agreed totally with them. So that is one area that we're going to be looking at in a select committee. One of the main problems that was identified was that although 2 medical certificates are required before a person can be committed, there is absolutely no requirement that either of the medical certificates be issued by a specialist alcohol and drug practitioner following the personal assessment. Now that is quite a concern, I believe. The Law Commission also said that the statutory period of detention is 2 years, which far exceeds what is normally necessary to undertake any form of treatment. And there again, I can agree with that particular area. The Act itself made inadequate provision for any review of the detention decision. So quite a concern there on people's human rights, and that there was generally insufficient safeguards to protect the rights of people held under the Act. And one of the biggest areas that I thought was most interesting was that few treatment facilities are actually certified to accept people under the regime, and consequently there's very little flexibility in the types of program available. Now, those are big issues that need to be resolved, and no doubt we'll be spending quite a bit of time on them at Select Committee. Now, all of us in this House know that we've got a problem with illicit drugs. In fact, we have got one of the highest drug rates in the world. And although we're aware of this, we're also aware that there are no real statistics on this very issue. We're operating in an area where we're uncertain of how big the problem actually is. We don't have any idea of the extent of the problem we are dealing with. Don't know how many people are even likely to be affected by this legislation. We all know, though, that the devastating effect that addiction has on an individual and a whānau and the wider community can't be overestimated. And of course, there's all the resulting hassles that result from that. Poor health and education outcomes, increased crime, and the breakdown of relationships and family groups. In his latest report, the Director of Mental Health reported that the number of people that accessed specialist mental health and addiction services in 2014 was quite vast. Because would you believe addiction treatment is not recorded separately from mental health? So really, when we get down to it, it is very difficult to determine how many people are actually accessing the specialist addiction treatment. We do know that district health boards are struggling to cope with increased and overwhelming demand. So we're concerned on this side of the House that if there's going to be an increase in the use of compulsory treatment provision, that our current workforce is resourced adequately to cope with that increased demand. We know too that we've got an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff approach through to this bill. So it is often when one hits the bottom that the compulsory treatment report comes into being. And it should only ever be used in extreme emergency situations where there's no other option. We don't want to see the open door attitude that the United States often have to compulsory treatment. We've heard of very bad stories from across in the United States. But we were pleased to see that severe substance addiction is defined as, and I quote from the bill, the compulsive use of a substance that is of such severity that it poses a serious danger to the health or safety of the person suffering from it, or severely diminishes the person's ability to care for himself. We would also like to see the addition of a clause that states that no other treatment options have been considered, or they've all been considered and tried. We all know that compulsory treatment is not the best way to facilitate treatment. So how can we encourage those who actually need help to seek it for themselves? Quite an interesting challenge there, because the stigma towards mental health issues and seeking help have to be removed. So therefore, we need some funding directed towards the situation. We need education as well as treatment, and that in itself is a big ask. We're pleased that there are provisions in the bill to inform family members of the person's status and notify them of the centre where their family member is receiving treatment, as well as any other information. But we believe that families should also have the opportunity to have some input into the decision making. It's difficult to see how the bill will be incorporated as part of the vision of the Director of Mental Health's Division for Mental Health in 2030 for, and I quote, a holistic family whānau focused model of delivery. So during the select committee stage, we're going to be interested in discussing how the rights of the person can be protected and ensuring that the bill doesn't contravene the UN conventions. Mr. Speaker, we are adamant on New Zealand, on this side of the House, New Zealand First in particular, that any benefits for compulsory treatment have to outweigh any potential infringements on the person's rights. So the criteria around compulsory treatment has to be robust. Additionally, we've got concerns about the lack of evidence or otherwise of compulsory addiction treatment and the ability to deter future substance abuse. And of course, there are no statistics on that. It's critical that the person is actually receiving the best form of treatment, and I think other people have actually mentioned this as well. When this bill passes into law, because it inevitably will, it's expected to cost $775,000 to implement. We would like to know if there's going to be new money allocated for this, or if it is expected to be taken from the existing mental health and addiction budget, because that is already stretched at this point in time. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand First supports the bill, and we're going to be following the issues that I raised very closely, and we look forward to hearing from a wide range of people to carefully consider their views and the issues that they have identified as well. Thank you.